Okay. I'm Annika Sangster, and I am in ministry in Middle Musquodoboit and online.
I'm Catherine Stuart. I'm the Regional Minister for Children, Youth, and Young Adults for all three Atlantic regions.
And I'm Mike Henderson, and I'm the minister at the Brookfield Pastoral Charge in Nova Scotia.
So, we are talking today about the traditions of hope as they appear to us in the narrative lectionary, in the Revised Common Lectionary, and in a movie clip that I threw in for fun. So, let's get started with that. Where do you see hope in these readings from the prophets?
Well, I guess they're apocalyptic in nature. Um, so and I believe that apocalyptic literature was written to give people hope in times of fear and persecution. So I think just in the general tenor of the readings.
Yeah, in the Daniel reading in particular, I think I see hope um in the king's address, I think, at the end, where the king says that God is enduring forever, that God's kingdom shall never be destroyed and dominion has no end. Um, I think that there's hope found in that because we see so much going on around us, and we wonder about where God is in all of that. But that's a reminder that faith isn't meant to stop us from experiencing bad things, but it serves as a way through them, right? So I think that the hopeful nature in that is that it's our faith, the hope in God, the trust that we have in God that brings us through these times. And so yeah, I can see why Daniel's book would be appealing to
Yeah, I
people.
found that one quite hopeful as well. A slightly different part, but the king was the one who kind of pointed that out for me. Um, it was kind of like he wasn't sure he should be hopeful for Daniel's survival, but then like he was. And so where did that come from? And like that was kind of the most interesting part and the most hopeful part for me was the fact that he didn't even believe, but he still had hope that Daniel's God that he didn't even believe in would save Daniel from the lions. I don't know, it's just kind of mind-blowing how much hope this guy had in something that he didn't even understand even an inkling of. What about the Luke passage? Any hope
But
in that one for either of you?
yeah, I mean, I think thinking about the passage as a whole, to me, it's kind of saying when you see bad things happening and really bad things happening and you're dispirited, um, that those are actually signs that a new day is coming. um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I find hope in the Luke passage in that, we are on this threshold of a new church year, right? And so we see that the old year has kind of gone by us. Um, and rather than being in despair about the things that we didn't get done or that we would have rathered happen a different way, that, this passage kind of encourages us to say, okay, like heaven and earth, won't pass away. Like, the old things will, but what does it say? Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away, I think is the line. So,
Yes.
so move into the new with, again, with the faith, with the hope that things can be different, that, it's the end of a new cycle, the end of an old cycle so that a new cycle can begin.
Mhm.
I found the hope in this similar place in that particular passage, like the fig tree, and as soon as they sprout leaves and you can see yourself and know that summer is already near. I think being in the part of the world that we're in, the hope of that brief season where it's okay to be outside and you're not going to die is uh, is always a hopeful thing. And even like the recycling of the fig tree's life in that like it doesn't die after just one year of producing figs. It produces figs over and over and over again on different parts of it as it grows and gets different. So like the roots are still the same, but what comes out of it is so different. And there's still possibility even in something that might look dead. There's still lots of possibility left. So I feel like that's hopeful.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, the fig tree in this time of the year, things are resting, right? So that they can grow again. And I think the constancy in the fig tree growing and growing and growing amidst everything happening around it is hopeful too, because, um, yeah, the chaos of the world swirls around us, but there is that constant, that new life that grows despite it in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's interesting. I think both of you know I used to hang out with a lot of people of a particular Buddhist school. I guess I still do, but maybe not in so formalized ways. But we'd be having a very different conversation because in lots of schools of Buddhism, hope isn't always seen as a positive thing. It's the kind of the flip side of fear. So in this worldview, um, when they hear hope, they hear okay, we're going to wait for someone else to take charge and do this thing instead of taking charge and doing this thing. Um, I don't have quite as negative a view of hope. I do have a negative view of false hope. I When my dad was dying, I heard over and over, just hope for a miracle. You never know, and I would be very kind of resentful.
Yeah.
Would you
Hmm.
stop, BSing me? And so, yeah, that time I got really um, almost angry at false hope. Um, but I think actual hope is, life giving.
Yeah, and I think that there like false hope is almost as bad as just
Yeah.
lie. Like it feels like a lie. It feels like something that's not true. And if I'm steeped in re I find it easier in some cases to have the possibility of hope
Mhm.
if I can see what's real in front of, like, you know,
That's
if I
right.
can at least be based in reality.
Mhm.
Um, to be hopeful about something, to be hopeful that things can change, that things can be different,
Mhm.
but with that lens of what actually is going on in front of you.
Yeah. So hope has to be more than just a wish.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really appreciate that reference to hope, like from the Buddhist tradition. It feels more positive to me than you were making it out to be. I mean, the absence of fear, like that seems hopeful alone.
Mm.
Yeah.
But I was trying to figure out like how I would describe hope to kids. And when you're not afraid, that's hope. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, and even when you are afraid, though, I think hope for me is the spark that keeps me going, right? Like, I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen in the world, particularly in the current political,
Yeah.
you know, arena. Um, but and so that has me a little bit fearful. But I think we need hope in order to keep going. Like, because, for me, hope answers the question, why bother?
mm,
Yeah.
Right? It answers the question, why why do I think that the world can be a better place? Why do I even bother talking about these things or working with children so that they have a different reality of the world? It's that notion that something can be different. So keep going at it, keep forging forward. It's like almost a partner to persistence, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
yeah,
What keeps you going when you're afraid?
yeah,
Like,
like
not necessarily the absence of the fear, but what keeps you going to get past the fear?
hmm. And but I think hope feels different than courage too.
Mhm.
Um, because hope, yeah, it I think hope is what gives me the idea that, that God's been here before.
mm,
Like that God's gone before us, God's been in, been behind us, beside us, within us. That there's just this sense that we can keep going because God's been here before.
mhm,
Yeah.
Yeah. It it's been a very interesting couple of years and seeing how my thoughts about hope have changed over time and how maybe even how that's impacted my theology. Like things that I would have felt sure of before, I'm now kind of wondering, well, maybe if that is even possible, is that worth it to even consider, like to have the hope? Like it's so hard to explain. But yeah, I just hope to be pleasantly surprised and even like having the faith that I could be pleasantly surprised is
mm,
kind of where I am. Like
mm.
how do I keep myself? Because it feels better to be in that to me right now than to not be in that, where once upon a time I used to need to understand everything. But now I'm kind of, I like to understand everything, but um, I need the hope more than I need the understanding.
Mm.
Hmm.
And I think it's due to the current political context, the current life circumstances, all of those things. So, where do we see hope in the world?
I think was it Mr. Rogers' mom who said, "Look for the helpers."
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, and trying to be a helper.
Hmm. Yeah, and the idea that even in the midst of all of the mistrust and the wider divide between people, that there are still people trying to mend that.
Mhm,
Because it would be so easy to just throw up our hands and not go to the door of the lion's den to even bother looking,
mhm,
right? Because that should be the end,
mhm,
right? Daniel should be eaten by the lions and no questions asked and go on your merry way, Mr. King. And I think it would be very easy for us to behave in a similar way, to just throw up our hands, say the world's going to hell, and why are we bothering to try make anything different?
it's tempting.
It is. It's very tempting, and it's very tempting. I think it's very tempting in the adult world. It's less tempting when you see children or even teenagers trying so hard to find their place in the world,
Mm,
to walk away. I think that's because, I want the world to be, I remember that I want the world to be so different for them.
Mm.
And that some of them, what's going on around them be darned, they want to be the ones that help, right? That do the thing. And so, if they're doing the thing, then well, what's wrong with me if I'm not doing the thing?
Mhm.
That's gonna bring hope to other people, right? Like they're the ones that want to figure out homelessness and food insecurity and why should older people be lonely and you know um I mean, I even just watched Ethan make a choice, right? Like he chose to go with his grandfather because he didn't want Grampy to be lonely. He could have stayed home and played his video game, right? So he's off doing that. And uh, yeah, like I see some of his friends making similar choices that are, in a lot of ways countercultural.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a bit of an age gap between my kids, and I definitely see um, how maybe hope is a bit more of a natural instinct that kind of gets teased out of you maybe through the teenage years. Like I definitely worry more about that. Like my littlest one is definitely always willing to help and always ready to help. And even the one who's a year older than her is still pretty often willing to help. How can I help? I don't want that animal to be hurting. Like she still has lots of empathy and she's growing lots of those things. And then you get to the teenage years and they just are having such a hard time with everything that how, like, it's not as easy to feel as hopeful as it was when you were littler. So, like, how can we bring back that hope for teenagers when things like the elections are happening? And even for older than that, because like if you don't get it back as a teenager, how are you ever going to get it back as an adult? Because teenagers at least still have some um not realities left to
Yeah, but
indulge in.
I think that that's where faith conversations, like I remember back to being a teenager, and I think that's where faith conversations at that age are so important. Um, because they need to know, like I remember needing to know that the world would get better, like that things would get better, right? And so it was trusted adults around me that had those conversations with me that showed me that something different was possible, right? And so I really believe that we don't do hope well alone,
Mhm.
right? And I think that at this time of year when so much, well, and especially with the current weather, 12 days of rain or 14 days of rain or whatever it's been, it can be pretty easy to slip into a dark spot if you're by yourself. But hope is found in community. And I think that we need to remind children and teenagers that, and even young adults, that they're not alone, that they're loved, that they're, and just for being who they are. Not
Mm.
that we have any kind of strings attached to that.
I love the idea of hope being a group effort.
Yeah.
This, yeah, that's really appealing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what appeals to me about a lot of these words that we use in Advent is that for me, they become verbs, right? They become actions. They become, and that's how they become tangible. That's how they become something that we can grab onto physically,
Mhm.
is when we do them together, and explore what they mean together, and then yeah, you can take them out into the world.
And when we look at how the stories change from one generation to the next, what
Hmm.
was hope for one generation, and how that sparks something else for another generation, like
Yeah.
the constant cycling of that is really hopeful.
When I was growing up, at least when it came to junior high and high school, I found it pretty easy to have hope because I saw, the world kind of marching toward progress. And I thought, well, when I'm, a fully grown adult, everything's going to be like Star Trek and everybody's going to get along and it's going to be inclusive. And now here we are. And
Yeah.
I think it would be harder to maintain hope today if I were younger. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Like there's 4 years in the difference between us,
Mhm.
and then another 4 years between me and Catherine. And I'm thinking even the difference between you and Catherine is
Mm,
there's probably a little bit of a difference there in the ability because I think it's gotten a lot harder to see hope,
mm,
um,
Hmm.
for sure.
But I think that's why we need to keep looking at the scripture stories too, though, because they were written so long ago and people then were struggling with, they had very different ways of saying it. We don't say
Yeah.
that we watch the stars and the sun and the moon anymore, really,
mhm,
right? To look at if we're looking at the Luke passage. Um, but just the idea that they were going through some bad and some not so hopeful things, but again that they still had this notion that eventually that would pass away and it would usher in this time of prosperity and being able to be hopeful again. Because, I look
Yeah.
back and I think, okay, if they could hold on to that, something's got to get better for us too, right?
Well,
Like
and
when do
that's
we
why
come
I'm
out of
loving
this
this
cycle?
theme. Like that's why I'm loving this theme. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah, because
traditions we love become the stories we
we
tell.
tell.
mm,
Yeah.
It's not so much about the exact words of the tradition as it is the tradition of telling stories of hope.
mm,
Hmm.
mm,
Yeah, and I think too it's for us to be able to tell those stories when younger generations do feel like they're losing hope, to say, okay, like this is just a bumpy time. This isn't the end of the world. It's the end of the world as we know it, to quote REM, I think it was that sang that first. But it's, you know, with every bumpy or hard time comes a new smoother way. And whether that's, I don't know. But it's something that we can live in hope because earlier generations have seen it come and go.
mm,
And so there is an assurance, I think, in that, and that God is with us through it all. That faith doesn't erase those hard times, but it gives us the way, it gives us something to hold on to as we make our way through it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Catherine and Mike, for
thank you.
joining me today. Believe it or not, our
Thanks.
20 minutes is up.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Join me back next week. And yeah, feel free to share this with folks if this conversation was helpful to you.